Hello, everybody, and welcome to Virtual Bourbon. My name is Steve Akley, and we have a fun time today. We're going to be tasting some George Dickel from 1985. So a nice vintage there, and we'll get to compare and contrast that to a current version. We're going to be doing that blind, though, so we don't know exactly what's what. As always, our master of ceremonies, Mr. Wes Hardin, will be taking us through history and things like that. Hello, Wes. How you doing?
Hey, Steve. How's it going, man?
Good, good. I got one other person I'd like to introduce, Mr. Benjamin Rouse. He is here from George Dickel. So it's always fun. We like playing these sometimes. We go through history. He can help contribute to some of that as well as you see fit. Benjamin, feel free to jump in at any time as Wes is going through that. We would love to have you contribute in that way. And then you'll be playing along too. We didn't tip what's going on, which one's which. So you'll be tasting them alongside with us. We like to go through, get nosing notes, tasting notes on both of them, blind, and then we like to guess two things. There's always two things we like to guess, which is the dusty and which is your favorite. So we'll do that blind, and then we'll announce what is what. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Wes Hardin to get things rolling. All right, Wes.
All right. Hello, everyone. I want to thank everyone that's been here before, and anyone that's new, welcome aboard. These events are always cool. I just want to start off and remind everyone what we do and how we're going to do it. So everyone should have a sample. They should be labeled Dickel 1 and Dickel 2. Those are the samples. We're going to sample those throughout the event. But what we would like to do, we're going to talk about the tasting notes and so forth along the way while I go through the history. And obviously, Benjamin's going to jump in as well. What I would like to ask everyone to do is hold off your opinions on which one you think is the recent or the dusty, and which one is your favorite. Hold those opinions to the end, because at the very end of this, we'll go through and we'll grab everyone's vote for their favorite and which one's the dusty, and then we'll see how everyone did. So what I do ask, tasting notes are perfect. Any questions along the way, but let's hold our opinions to the end if we can. And that way, what we don't want to do, we don't want to sway anyone's opinion with the power of suggestion, for lack of better terms. So Benjamin, I'm going to start going through some of this history here. What I'd like everyone to do is, if you haven't already, go ahead and pour out sample number 1 in your glass. As I'm going through some of the history, go ahead and nose it. If you want to taste it, go ahead. We'll stop here in a couple of minutes and we'll go through and do some tasting notes and things of that nature in a minute. So just to start, obviously, what Steve said, we're going to be tasting two. We're going to be tasting two of Dickel number 12 offerings. One is from 85 and one is from literally off the shelf a few weeks ago. So it's the recent offering, the current offering on the market for Dickel. So George Dickel originated, it's technically Cascade Hollow Distilling. That's kind of the name behind the scenes. Everyone knows it as George Dickel. What I want to do is I'm going to talk about George Dickel a little bit first, and then get into some of the history of the brand and the distillery. So he's a German immigrant. He was born in Germany in 1818. He didn't immigrate to the U.S. until 1844. And when he got here, he actually didn't distill anything when he first got here. He was a retail businessman in the Nashville area in Tennessee in the 1850s, and he started selling whiskey out of his retail location in 1861. So at that point in time, selling whiskey was basically selling barrels of whiskey, or people were bringing jugs and filling them up. It was very much grassroots, in-store kind of offering. Their bottling individual bottles wasn't widespread at that point, or if it was even around. And then after the Civil War, he actually opened a liquor store in Nashville. So that's where he got his start. He was a liquor store owner and founder.
He's a shoe cobbler by trade, Wes.
There you go, shoe cobbler.
That's what he did. He sold shoes, and he may have gotten into a little bit of trouble for rectifying that whiskey before he actually had a license and opened his liquor store.
It happens.
He was brought up on federal charges like 2 years before we established the George A. Dickel Trading Company in 1870 for rectifying liquor without a license. He paid $1,000 fine to have that taken care of and wiped from the books, which is why his name is on the bottle and none of his counterparts' names are on the bottle.
Yeah, so he in the late 1860s, he founded, not the distillery, but he did found the George A. Dickel Company. It was a wholesaling firm. And they basically bought whiskey from regional distillers. So they didn't have one source; they had multiple sources. And to your point, he was a rectifier, which is a term that everyone automatically assumes is a bad term. It has been a bad term, but basically, he's an NDP of the time, is what it really amounts to. He branded it as his own. He sold it in a barrel jug, and then he started selling it in bottles. In 1870s, there was whiskey being produced at Cascade Hollow by John F. Brown and F.E. Cunningham. And then in 1883, there was a local businessman named McLynn Davis. He joined the operation as the distiller, and he's actually credited with the original Cascade George Dickel whiskey recipe that they used there. So, again, some of bourbon history is a little weird, but some of what I found, that was the suggestion anyway. But they didn't initially sell George Dickel. It was actually Cascade whiskey. That was where their claim to fame came from. That was a popular brand. It was labeled as Mellow and Moonlight. And what was interesting about that is evidently Davis was famous for cooling his mash at night. His opinion was that cooling the mash at night gave the whiskey a more mellow flavor. Again, it's probably a lot of marketing more than science. But yeah, they labeled it as Mellow as Moonlight was their kind of tagline. And then in 1878, they actually opened the Cascade Hollow Distillery in Coffee County, Tennessee, which is in the close to the area where the Tullahoma is now.
The old distillery is about a mile from where we sit currently.
Okay, perfect. George Dickel purchased a large share of the company, so that's where he kind of got his buy-in. And then in 1886, he had an accident. One of the things I wanted to ask you, I didn't find out exactly what the accident is. Do you know what that was?
Yeah, he fell off a horse.
Oh, there you go then, as one would in those days.
Yeah, he fell off a horse, and he suffered through those injuries for 6 years.
Yep.
Until he perished in 1894.
Yep, that's exactly.
He was an old man. He perished at the ripe old age of 76, which was living back in those days for sure.
No, absolutely. So as his health declined, he couldn't participate. His partners kind of took control of the wholesaling firm, the daily operations, and obviously the distillery. So go ahead.
Sorry, there's also a little bit of nepotism in there as well. So George married Victor Schwab's sister, and then Victor married sister-in-law, and then Victor married her sister. So it was actually kind of like it was a family-run business. And so when we see George Dickel pass away in 1894, he actually told his wife to sell his interest in the company. And since her and Victor were siblings, she actually just kept them. And so that's how the Schwab family ended up actually owning the full operation of the distillery.
Her name was Augusta, wasn't it?
Augusta, yes, sir.
Yeah, it was Augusta. I think she died
Augusta
in 1960.
Banzer was her maiden name.
Absolutely. So let's take a quick break. Let's everyone, I know people have been swirling and sniffing and sipping. Let's start getting some nosing and tasting notes. It's an open mic, so feel free to jump in. Just a couple that have come up on the chat. Looks like Steve says it's light brown sugar, sweet tarts, and a small hint of dill pickle. And then our
Love
buddy,
the dill pickle note.
Yeah, I know.
Mm-hmm.
Our buddy Tim Swyatt says brown sugar, Smarties, and powder sugar pastry. So 2 opinions so far. It's pretty consistent. We've got some brown sugar and some Smarties going on at the minimum.
Yeah.
What's everyone else think?
I find sample one is a lot. It's a little bit more mellow.
Okay.
It's not hitting the nose quite so so strong.
Would you say it's mellow as moonlight?
Yes.
I
wouldn't have, but I
Would.
should.
All right, perfect. That sounds
I
like
will
something
from now on.
That sounds like something Tim would say, actually.
For me, and especially being a Tennessee whiskey and me being a Tennessee boy, I've been born and raised in Middle Tennessee, since 1987. It's got this very consistent, a lot of people describe it as like peanuts and pretzels. it has this very consistent, like fresh cracked black walnut to me, on the nose, right? Like it's I think that's where a lot of people get like that waxy, smarty kind of flavor profile. It's got that almost like tannin version if you've like eaten a handful of walnuts kind of thing.
What's interesting about this, and I thought I saw Royce on here, Royce and Becca.
They were here for a
They
second.
jumped off. They come back on. I'll talk to them. I'll say one thing, that this reminds me on the nose. It reminds me a lot of the stuff that comes out of Royce's place.
Mm-hmm.
There's always, Royce has there's a certain, he's kind of has a signature nose, to me at least, on a lot of his products. And this
He always says
has-
it's his Marisada rye or something like that. There's like that signature nose that we get. So I don't know.
Yeah, it reminds me of that. I'm not saying he is that, but it definitely reminds me of a little bit of what he gets.
You got peanut brittle out there. Again, a couple of brittles. So
Yeah, and
Smarties
the,
again.
the funny, so I'm getting that in number 2. Number 1, I'm just getting a lot of alcohol.
Alcohol.
See, I get number 1 to me, I'm getting like almost like not so much the Smarties. I don't get, like, Smarties are real tart to me. I don't get the tartness. I get more of like a sweeter fruit mix of a hard candy. So kind of like Runts or something like that. Something that's a little bit sweeter. You get some of that confectioner sugar, but I also get the fruit flavors out of it. And I don't really get banana, but I get like kind of like a peach, pear, kind of a crisp, fresh fruit, along with some of that confectionery sugar that Kent Mace popped in about. I get both of those.
Does
Mhm.
anybody ever claim, because I will tell you, Dickel's kind of polarizing in my bourbon group. Love it or you don't. I absolutely love it. But what a lot of people will say is it tastes like Flintstone vitamins. I don't get that necessarily, but I actually like Flintstone vitamins. So
Yeah, I don't
that's
get
a
that.
plus for me.
I don't
A
get
lot of
that.
people do say that. That is very common that people
Okay.
say it tastes like.
I think
Flintstone.
it's more, I think it's I think the people that say that just can't register that Smarties, Runts, fruit sugar flavoring. And I think they default to, like, once one person says it, it's like the Fred Minnick joke. Everything tastes like,
Yeah.
whatever
Marzipan.
Fred says. Yeah, marzipan
Mhm.
and all
Yeah.
these crazy things. I
You're
think
right, because
it
it's
becomes the power
universal
of
in the club.
right,
Yeah,
it's a
everybody
power-
tastes that.
Yeah, I think it's part of the power of suggestion. I have never gotten the Flintstone vitamins. Now I do get fruit flavors and things of that nature, but to me, if you bite into a Flintstone vitamin, it's a or any kind of hard vitamin like that, it's a very distinct flavor. You would know it if you had it in a whiskey. At least that's my opinion anyway.
Yeah.
It's chalky.
Chalky.
It's
Chalky,
like
thank you,
smart.
yeah.
Yeah, Smarties isn't. I mean, I get Smarties. I'm trying to. You remember the candy necklaces that you would hold, and you bite
Yeah.
off of,
Mhm.
and you hit.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to. I don't know what the name of it is, but Smarties is about as close as I could get to something. You're right. You're right, Wes. It's not as tart as that type of candy, but it's like a powdered candy, but not chalky.
So what's everyone getting on the taste and the finish? So to me, and just for reference, both of these are 90 proofers, just if you were wondering.
Okay.
It's got
Interesting.
a nice, I guess it would be a Tennessee hug in this particular case, but it's got a nice Tennessee hug finish on it. To me, it drinks a little bit over a 90 proof.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it drinks a little over, and there's a little bit of a like a cinnamon allspice on the end. The front of the palate to me was more fruit again, with a nice little spice on the end.
A little spice on the end, sticks around on your tongue, really. So, yeah. Mr. Gascamp, what are you thinking as you taste this one?
It has 130 proof going in the mouth and about a 70 proof finish. So I think those average together end up 90.
That's how that works. That's how it works. All right. Mr. Gascamp, what do you think as you taste this one?
Yeah, it seems to go right around 90 proof to me. That seems to be right about right. Yeah, the finish is interesting because it does hang around for a while, but it's not but it's kind of like a slow hang. I don't know of another way to put it. It's not an overpowering finish, but it just kind of sticks around. It's pretty enjoyable. Yeah, and then I got Steve, you were dead nuts on the dill pickle. I picked up on that pretty quick, and that was kind of interesting. I haven't had a whole lot of Tennessee whiskey, so I don't know if that's a Tennessee whiskey trade or if that's a Dickel trade, or we're just lucky.
I have a little bit of insight there because my background is behind a bar, not in front of a Zoom camera necessarily. So I have probably tasted every type of weird distillate to come out of pretty much every corner of the world at some point over the last decade. And for me, it's because we actually tend to put a little bit more older whiskey because we're not the popular Tennessee whiskey, right? So we still make a lot of whiskey, but we keep it. And so our blends range a little bit higher age-wise than some of the other products that are on the shelf, just because we have the whiskey around. And I think that's where you start to get into some of those dill pickle notes. You start to get into some of those, what people refer to as like Flintstone vitamin flavors. I think that they are closer to like cooked or stewed fruit that have some type of tannin structure because they've spent that amount of time in a barrel, that you get a little bit of that chalky dryness, right? You kind of get it here in the back of your cheeks almost, and it kind of dries you out a little bit. I think that's where that flavor profile comes from more than anything else, because the current number 12, our classic Tennessee whiskey that you buy on your shelves today, is a blend of 6 to 14-year-old whiskeys. And there's not many whiskey producers, especially American whiskey producers, that are able to put 14-year-old juice in a bottle just because of volume and demand, right? The market calls for it and they put it out. So I think, we put, for lack of a better term, kind of dusty whiskey in a bottle from the jump.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's on the taste. I'm getting a little bit of, it's a note that's hard for me to pick up on. And it kind of reminds me of a little, I don't know if it's dill so much, but it's kind of a floral, kind of earthy floral type of note that you get with certain whiskey sometimes. So it's interesting. So, all right, let's move into some more of the history, and then we'll jump into number 2 in a second. So in 1888, Victor Schwab purchased other partner shares of the Cascade Hollow Distillery. And basically that purchase made Dickel and Company the sole distributor for Cascade. So at the time of that purchase, basically Cascade Hollow Distillery and George Dickel Company came together, and they were Dickel was the sole distributor for the whiskey. Schwab purchased the Climax Saloon in Nashville, and he actually advertised that place as being the headquarters for Cascade whiskey, even though obviously the distillery was the headquarters. And again, as we talked about earlier, George Dickel died in 1894. His shares of Dickel and Company were sold to his wife, Augusta. He actually, to your point, he actually urged her, like, sell out, but she refused to. And then when she died in 1916, she willed her shares to Schwab. In the early 1900s, as most everyone did, Schwab was part of the fight against the rise of Prohibition. But in spite of all the efforts, Tennessee enacted Prohibition in 1910. And so this was a very interesting piece of history I think everyone's going to like. So in 1910, Schwab relocated his operation to Stitzel-Weller in Louisville so that he could survive during Prohibition. The odd thing about this was, after I did the research for this and typed up notes, it was just last week I was on one of the Facebook pages, and a bottle of Cascade Hollow whiskey came up from this time frame, and sure enough, it's actually from the Stitzel-Weller distillery. I can't even believe there's one lingering around. And I probably would have never even thought to look at the back of the label of the picture that close, but I'd done the research, and this stood out to me as probably the one piece of information that I had no idea about prior to doing research. And then sure enough, that bottle pops up. This guy's got one of these bottles that looks like it's in pretty decent shape. And it's a bottle that was produced when they were at Stitzel-Weller in Louisville. They produced it there until I say we, because I'm in Kentucky, until Kentucky enacted Prohibition in 1917. But then basically, like everyone else, the operation shut down in 1920. 4 years after Prohibition was repealed, the Schwabs sold the brand. Actually, his heirs at the time sold the brand to Schenley. But the recipe had never been written down. So pretty common back in the early times. You know, you've got somebody that's got an idea in their head, and they've got it in memory, and they don't want it on paper because they're afraid somebody's going to steal it, because they're convinced it's the best recipe there is. That was the case. The Schenley guys actually contacted 2 former distillers and were able to kind of recreate that recipe. So in the 40s and 50s, George Dickel's Cascade straight bourbon whiskey was actually distilled, aged, and bottled. And at the time, it was OFC in Frankfurt, which was George T. Stagg, which was Ancient Age, which is now Buffalo Trace. So that was another piece of interesting history, which is part of why I love bourbon history, because even though you think there's little to no ties between Kentucky bourbon and Tennessee whiskey and things of that nature, you find out when you start going down the rabbit hole on some of these items that the tree of bourbon has many branches, and there's a lot of the same people hanging out on the same branches. So, this was started off as Tennessee whiskey. Prohibition comes around. They have the foresight to partner up with Stitzel Weller. Prohibition hits, shuts most everybody down besides 10 or so companies at the time. They come out of Prohibition. They're working with OFC in Frankfurt. In 1956, though, Schenley made an attempt to purchase Jack Daniels, but ultimately that fell through. They were refused. And so basically they said, you know what, let's go back down to Tennessee and let's build what is today the Cascade Hollow Distillery in the new location. Is it in Tullahoma or is it right around Tullahoma? I never could figure. I've never been down there.
So the township is called Normandy.
Okay.
But the municipal area is Tullahoma.
Okay. And
so yeah,
it's a beautiful spot if you ever get down there.
I'm going to go down there at some point.
Yeah.
Sure.
There's a little like town square in Normandy. I've never seen anything happen there, but it exists. And like, I think honestly, one of the only reasons that town square still kind of sits there is because the distillery is kind of right behind it, right? It just kind of gives you a landmark of where to turn to get to Distillery Road to get to us.
Yeah. It's fun to tour both of those in the same day. Hit Jack and hit Dickel, and you see 2 opposite ends of the spectrum there. So you get to see.
You can also hit Uncle Nearest in that same day.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Now,
The trifecta now. Yeah.
Uncle Nearest is
And
in Shelbyville.
one of my favorite waterfalls.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Yep. So they built the distillery down there, which is now the same distillery that's operating today. The first mash was produced in 1959, and then the first bottle was bottled in 64. And I think that's the one that Ben was talking about earlier. At that same time, Schenley decided to drop the Cascade Hollow brand label, and that's when they actually created the George Dickel brand label. And then, as most companies in the 80s and 90s did, they went through various sales and mergers, was part of the bourbon downturn, but they basically ended up as a Diageo company, which is who owns those guys today. I do have a kind of a fact check question for Ben. So there's a I would call it a rumor, maybe it's fact, maybe it's not, but one of the things I found was there's some opinions that at one point in time, and maybe it still happens today, that you guys chill the whiskey before it goes through the Lincoln County process. Is that a fact or not?
What is the fact?
Okay.
Much in the faction of our original process being to cook our whiskey at nighttime. This was more so of a classic moonshiner trait, right? That's why we call them moonshiners, is because they would make this whiskey under the cloak of darkness, right? Harder to see smoke and fire. Fuzz probably ain't coming after you at 1 o'clock in the morning kind of scenario, right? But also too, there is a bit of science that goes into cold season whiskey or cold distilled whiskey, right? So in whiskey production, you have 2 seasons, spring and fall. And it is a well-known, I would consider it a fact, that winter whiskeys, things that come on that last end of your fall distillation season and the front end of your spring distillation season, tend to create your more viscous, your more barrel character gaining whiskeys than do your whiskeys during the summer, right? You're obviously cooking things to the same temperatures through the process and all of those things. But ambient temperature has a lot to play in it because there's no central heat and air inside the distillery whatsoever, right? Like it is temperature controlled by nature, much as in the same way as a moonshine still would be in a creek bed. And so there is obviously when things get colder, when things are colder, bonds are tighter, right? You're getting more surface contact with the liquid at that point. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about surface contact in a barrel, surface contact to a copper still. There is essentially the bonds are tighter when they're colder, right? So you're getting more exposure to those whiskeys. And so in that mindset, as soon as we come off the still, we do chill down to 140, and then we lay on top of that sugar maple charcoal.
Okay. All right, good. It's a fact then. All right.
Not to be confused with like chilled filtration or anything like
exactly.
that, right? It is absolutely just a distillation practice. Our master distiller, Nicole Marie Austin, would tell you that Lincoln County process is actually the final step to our distillation practice. We actually make a pretty rudimentary kind of thick viscous liquid off of the still anyway. And that final step of the charcoal mellowing is what brings us to what you experience in the glass.
All right. So as far as the history, that's kind of the history. I do want to walk through just because I wasn't 100% sure what the current offerings were. So I did a little research. So sounds like you guys use a mash bill of 84 corn, 8 rye, and 8 barley. Is that correct?
That is
so
correct.
It's one of the higher corn whiskey mash bills out there as far as mass production goes anyway.
To my knowledge, I think we are the highest.
I would think so.
Percentage
I think
corn whiskey.
Yeah. Prior to that, I think the highest I've heard is like 75. I think is one of the higher ones prior to here.
Mellow corn doesn't count.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of Steve's favorites, actually.
It is. I like mellow corn.
It's delicious.
Yeah. So current lineup is Dickel number 12, Dickel number 8. There's there you go. There's mellow corn there.
Mellow corn. Yeah.
There's a Dickel small batch 8-year bourbon. Which I'm assuming that does not go through the Tennessee process. It's just
it absolutely does.
Oh, it does. Okay, so it
absolutely,
just a marketing labeling thing, I guess.
Not at all. If we want to jump into the rabbit hole about bourbon, so bourbon is a set of laws, right? And as long as you follow those laws and don't do anything that those laws say you can't do, you can actually describe yourself as bourbon.
Oh no, I'm on board. I'm not on the Tennessee whiskey isn't a bourbon bandwagon. I was trying to figure out the reasoning or
why market that as bourbon.
Yeah, that was the question.
I think that in the market today, bourbon's obviously the hot term.
Okay, makes sense.
Right, and that's what everybody's looking
at. That sounds honest right there. That's just that's
honest. That's the answer. Yeah, that's the answer.
And then the second part of that answer is that we do have a history with bourbon being on our label. It wasn't necessarily Dickel bourbon, it was Cascade Hollow Kentucky bourbon when we were living at Stitzel-Weller. But we do have bourbon in our history. And I think that that's more so of where the idea probably sprouted from, but it's definitely where the idea is rooted in now, other than it being, marketing, because that's what it is for everybody, right?
Absolutely.
Marketing works, and it works if you work it, right? So
absolutely. There's no better way to pull bourbon people into Tennessee whiskey than marketing a bottle as a bourbon. Then all of a sudden they're in once they're in. So
right, and at the time frame when we were starting to delineate between Tennessee whiskey and bourbon, Tennessee whiskey was the preferred style because it was harder to obtain. Right at the time, you had late 1800s, early 1900s. You had a myriad of bourbon producers, but you only had 2 Tennessee whiskey distilleries on the face of the earth, right? And so you have your drinkers actually requesting and calling for Tennessee whiskey, but us experiencing prohibition 17 years longer than any other state in the union. That's how we get more of the term bourbon used to describe what we are actually known as American whiskey. In the broad conversation, right? Like bourbon is the worldwide expression of American whiskey.
And then there's the bottled and bond 13-year, which is fantastic. There's the Dickel barrel, single barrel 9-year-old, and these are out. The 9-year-old is a single barrel shelf product, not a private barrel select type of thing. Although you guys do those kind of things. And then there's a Dickel rye, which, if I'm not mistaken, your rye, you guys don't distill your rye. It comes from what was MGP, which is now Ross's Squibb, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, no, I call it the Heinz ketchup effect. You know what I mean? And also too, I think that's also something that maybe kind of gets a somewhat of a bad rap in the American whiskey conversation, is all these people that source from MGP. But the thing about that is that's what they do, is they make whiskey. And if you only have one still, which we only have one still in Cascade Hollow, rye tends to gum up the works a little bit. And so if you're trying to switch between a high grain like 95.5, which is what that mash bill is on our rye whiskey, into something that's super heavy corn and sweet and kind of slick, if you will, right? The sugar gives it this kind of, slickness, right? Oiliness. Rye can cause problems. We did try to bring the rye production home like 6 years ago, and ran a couple of different mash bills. And we obviously kept those rye whiskeys, and those are the ones that we've blended in with the Leopold Brothers collaboration, if y'all have seen or heard of that.
Yeah.
I see it back there, my man. Right on. Yeah. Have you had it yet? Sorry, I won't get off track. I apologize.
Oh,
No, we're doing a tasting with Steve later this month.
Yeah.
Right
Yeah,
on.
I've got
I
that one
picked up a
coming up.
bottle. I didn't want to open it until we did the tasting.
Nice.
Don't torture yourself. It's delicious.
I've heard
All right.
nothing but good things. So yeah, makes sense. But, yeah.
All right, let's jump to sample 2, and obviously we can start taking questions on. Probably more of the questions are for Ben, more so than me, I would think, at this point. But what do you guys think? Nosing on number 2, if you had any chance to taste it.
This one got thick.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of my brain that says port, not bourbon. It's got some viscosity to it. It's got, I'm getting that stewed fruit in here. Some sugars. That's a joy right there.
Mm-hmm.
And peanut brittle.
Yeah, I got the
I
peanut
like.
brittle a lot on the nose.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I get getting a very pronounced stone fruit on this too.
Mm-hmm.
This was the one that was definitely the fruitier of the two, just right off the nose. I definitely got more of the kind of savory, sweet flavors off of the first one, right? The peanuts and the brittles and the black walnuts. And the second one is absolutely just like orchard fruit. Like it's got this cool, just kind of apple pear scenario going for me.
It's like the fruit of the loom. It's got them all on.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
A cornucopia.
Fruit Loops.
There you go. Cornucopia.
We're
I
drinking
like it.
Fruit Loops.
A fruit
Looks,
melange.
Looks like Nate Mace on the chat says number 2 is much brighter and has a good mouthfeel on it there. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it hits harder than the 90 proof as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a really distinct note mid palate, and I can't figure out what it is, but it's super prominent. Like it slaps me right in the face, and I cannot pick out what it is. But it's I think you mentioned savory. Like to me, this is mid palate on number 2 just has like a, I don't know, man. It's just, I can't picture,
It
I
is-
can't figure out what it is, but it's got me struck here. I don't know.
For me, it is like the perfectly seasoned steak crust. Like this
Yeah,
is
it's
this
like,
is- meat bark, if you will, right? Like that's I have heard people describe George Dickel as smoky. I am a whiskey drinker, which means that I drink all types of whiskey, not just American whiskey, and I lean towards Scotch whiskeys. And obviously those are smoky. This is like fresh off the grill ribs right here. Just the outside, right? Just the seasoning.
It's that caramelization.
I think that's maybe what it is.
And that's what we're getting. We're getting that caramelization that's just a little burned and
yeah.
Now I want
Perfect.
to like not drink any more of this and save it and make a really good steak.
Yeah.
Who else has some tasting notes out there we haven't heard from yet? Bob Whitlatch, what about you, sir? You're awful quiet tonight.
Really enjoyed the walnut reference that Ben picked up on in the first one. Much fruitier on the second one. Bigger nose too, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, they nose very similarly. I think now that I'm going back to number 2, I'm getting some of that. We'll call it that meat flavor. I'm getting a little bit char protein, whatever you want to call it. It kind of has me baffled, actually.
And I am oh, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
So I was going to say real quick, I went back to one and it almost got kind of marshmallow on me, you know, even more sweet if that was possible on the nose.
You know,
Yeah,
so
this one opens up. I said I got, you know, it took a little bit for it to open up for me.
oh man,
And then it's a lot sweeter, a lot more complex. I see the marshmallow in there.
yeah, that's almost like, you're right, Mike. When I go back to 1, like if you were to make a s'mores and it
Yes.
slipped like a little piece
Yeah.
of fruit inside of it.
Yeah,
That's
there
it.
you go.
Yeah. Interesting,
kinda-
right?
Actually, that's an amazing. That's an amazing.
So now we're going to do
nose.
baked apple s'mores.
I'm down for it.
Yeah.
And they go great out after your steak, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's perfect. You know, I'll say this. Now that I've gone, and maybe, you know, sometimes you get into the power suggestion and so forth, and maybe it's just lingering on my tongue from number 2. But I went back to 1 and took a sip of that, and I'm starting to get some of that same weird note. I say weird, but it's weird because I can't understand what it is. But I'm starting to get, not as strong, but I'm starting to get some of that same note on number 1 as 2, right mid palate, like right in the middle of my tongue. It's very interesting.
A little more spice driven on number 1 for me, right? That mid palate is a little bit more like cayenne-ish, right? It's got a little bit more of that kind of like chipotle, you know, like pepper that's got a little bit of spice to it, not like black pepper or like fragrant like white pepper. And you know, that's the other thing too, is always try, especially in these type of scenarios, encourage people to say what's on their mind when they're talking about tasting, because it is absolutely subjective. I have just recently completed my WSET level 2 spirits award. So I've been like diving into more like, I guess, like normalized tasting terms, right? The more kind of like normally received tasting terms. But one of the best learning experiences I ever had behind a bar was actually with one of my liquor brand reps, who had one of the most expressive palates I've ever encountered, because he would be like, no, this tastes like your grandmama cooked pancakes on a Saturday morning and covered them in blueberries and syrup. And then you pick it up and you go, I don't know how you got there, but that's it. That's exactly what it is. So yeah, don't let that, you know, super fancy terminology, people with all these crazy words like marzipan and you know, things like that kind of get your throat off. It's safe space, you know. If it tastes like fresh baked waffles, you're nailing it.
We got a question on the chat. It says, are these the same type of rye grains? Kent Mace.
Okay.
Yeah. What's Kent, can you jump on real quick? What is the what
Well,
exactly
number
are you
one,
asking?
Well, are they the same type of rye? Has the rye changed in any?
Oh, okay. You're talking from the 80s till now.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
I could almost certainly tell you that, yes, it is a different style of rye. Especially with the way that agriculture works as a business, and like the patenting of seeds and that kind of thing, and genetically modified organisms to create products that feed more people than previously did, right? As we deal with, the world getting more populated and such. There is absolutely a difference in the grain that they were sourcing in the 80s from the grain that they're sourcing today. It's nothing that we've done intentionally, but it's just been what's available on the market, right? And so I would say that absolutely this is, if you can pick up that difference, I would say that those differences are the ones that are your telltale signs of, kind of which one is which as far as the age range goes. Because even for like that Leopold Brothers collaboration, he had to source a rye, and that's kind of where I jumped into that rabbit hole and learned that rye grains themselves have been changed, dramatically from 150 years ago. And that never stops, because now that science is involved, it's always going to be a process to see if we can get more yield out of those grains and those kind of things, right? And so I would absolutely be confident in saying yes, that these grains are different. The mash bill's the same, but the starches and the carbohydrates that we're actually getting out of the whiskeys is definitely different. The other thing too is with our mash bill being 84% corn, 8% rye, 8% malted barley, because we are so high corn, that low amount of malted barley is not enough enzyme to convert the sugars that's in our mash bill. So we do subsidize that currently. I do not know how they did that in the 80s. So there could also be a different version of that enzyme substitute, or a different process on whichever one is the Dusty.
Right.
Do you guys have call it a historic or legacy yeast that you've been using for a while, or do you purchase a yeast from like a vendor or supplier?
We did not. Yeah, we did not scrape the original yeast strain out of old water pipes or nothing crazy like that. We got the recipe from Shinley, UD, and then so yeah, no necessarily like proprietary yeast strain.
Okay.
We don't keep it under lock and key.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other tasting notes?
I like you can taste that they're the same, but that they're two sides of the different coin for everything. And one you've got fruit, but the other, it goes more to a compote or a jam, and it transforms. One has nuts, but the other one tastes more kind of like I'd say you go from a fresh walnut to a pecan pie.
It's like Mounds and Almond Joy. One has nuts, one doesn't, right?
Yeah, it tends to, I think sample one tends to be the object itself, and sample number two tends to be like it cooked into something.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I got you. I like that. Anyone else? Steve, you want to start voting?
Yeah. I think we're ready to vote. Any side by side? We'll give you just a second here to do a little side by side comparison. Wes and I'll just chit chat here while you guys compare and contrast, because you're going to be picking two things. Which one you think is the Dusty, and which one is your favorite? It may or may not be the same. So feel free to vote with your heart there.
And if you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm pleasing my palate.
Yep. Yeah,
sure.
I use the top of my hand.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a close vote, especially now that I've tasted both of them.
Yeah, they're both good. I'll say that. This is
I will too.
Good. That's good whiskey we're drinking tonight for sure.
That's good to hear. Where do you all live so we can track these sales increases?
That's right. We're right. I'm right in the heart of bourbon country. So
We're spread out across the country. Yeah.
I'm behind the enemy lines for you.
That's all right. It's all love, brother. We all make good whiskey.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I love the fact that there's still a debate: is Tennessee whiskey bourbon? Well, here they tell you they're doing the exact same thing, both process on their Tennessee whiskey and their bourbon, and they're able to label either way. I can't understand why there's still an argument. I don't get it.
I think it's now become,
and the companies are arguing it. They're
Yeah.
I've heard Jack Daniels reps say on podcasts and stuff for the public, hey, we can be bourbon if we want to be. We just choose to call it Tennessee whiskey.
Yeah, I think it's become now where people will post that question just to stir
To
people
try
up,
to-
just to stir the pot up. I think
Yeah,
99% of bourbon
they want the fight.
enthusiasts,
They want the argument.
they want the fight. They want the argument. They want the memes.
If
they
you're
want
not fighting online, you're not doing it right, I guess, is
Right,
some
yeah,
people's
yeah.
thoughts. I don't know why. I can't stand that. I hate when people,
Yeah.
just try to get you going. I do
But-
not like that.
We're right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Tennessee whiskey, like I think a lot of people get it up in arms because people will say it as Tennessee whiskey is bourbon, and I don't believe that to be true. I think Tennessee whiskey can be called bourbon, but we are absolutely our own expression of whiskey, and that's why we went back and had the legislation passed to make sure that if you were making a Tennessee whiskey, that you were producing it only in Tennessee, and it's the funniest thing in the world because. No, I don't think the people in Scotland are having this piss and match between Islay and Campbelltown, right?
Right.
Like it's such a classic American thing, right? It's kind of, you're proud to be an American, right? You're proud to drink the whiskey that you drink and your daddy drank and your granddaddy drank, and and I think that's what's so awesome about it, right? Is that it is completely subjective, and everybody kind of gets emotional and riled up about it. But the fact of the matter being is that you can be emotional and you can be wrong at the same time, and it's right.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't. Yeah.
It is
It's
funny
it's
though
not a
that
problem. Drink good whiskey.
there are things that the brands evolve, and then they try to re-educate consumers, and it's tough to do that. Once you tell them,
Yes.
hey, we're Tennessee whiskey, this is something different, it's not the same. It's hard to then be like, yeah, well, we're actually bourbon. Or another thing that distilleries did for a long time was older age is better. That's why we put an age statement. You want to want to look to that label. If it has a 12-year-old age statement or a 13-year-old age statement, you want that. And now they go back and that doesn't really matter. We blend the taste, and it's hard to get consumers to change once you've educated them on what they need to do. So that's part of it too. So
I think the US is right. We're just in the start of what Scotland actually went through. Is, I mean, they don't argue about Islay and Highland and Speyside now, but they used to. And the reason they did is because it used to legally there was only Highland and Lowland, and then the Highland people came and said, "Look, we're different than everybody else. We want to be called Speyside." And then a group said, "Well, we want to be called Campbelltown." And Tennessee was the first one that says, "Hey, even though we are this thing, we're also our own thing." Right. And that's why Tennessee's doing that. That's why Texas has Texas certified. That's why Missouri went through the steps to pass the law for Missouri whiskey.
We'll get this settled in about 300 years is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
The best part about that piece of history is we all started distilling at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's some more historic methods, some pot still distillation and that kind of thing that we see in Ireland and Scotland and whatnot. But we do not see any type of mass production of spirits like this until the late 1800s and the invention of the coffee still, the column still. So the funny thing is that the Scottish are a little bit more reasonable, it seems, and came to an agreement of disagreements, if nothing else. And just we're like, okay, well, let's just keep blending good whiskey and putting it out into the world, right? It's not how good you can weld, it's how good you can grind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I thought the ultimate troll move, though, was Crown Royal putting out a bourbon mash Canadian whiskey. I thought that was it.
They are still undergoing litigation for that currently. So
wow.
I can neither confirm nor deny anything about those conversations.
Wow. All right. Wes, let's vote. You tell us, you can run through and lead the voting here.
All right.
Who's up first?
Let's start with Mike Gascamp.
I think he's got the longest streak, by the
I
way.
got the
doesn't he?
streak, so you're gonna
Oh.
put me on the hot spot.
He's on the
put you
hot
on.
seat. This is our longest streak, but I think it's only like 3, isn't it? Is it 3 or 4? What is
Three or
it?
it's-
four. It ain't.
You
nothing
got to
to
keep
cry
track of
over
yourself
if I
these
lose.
days. We're not that professional where we so we'll give you 4. So we'll say you got 4. It's all-time
We'll
record
say
that
I
we
got
do know
4.
is 16. The legend had 16 in a row. So you
Yeah,
belong with
I got a ways to go to catch
All
up.
right.
This
What's
one's
your
actually-
favorite? What's the Dusty tonight?
This one's actually interesting. I didn't think I would struggle with this one as much as I did, but I think 2 is a Dusty. And man, it's really hard to pick a favorite. This is probably the closest out of the current and not in Dusties that I've had for favorites. So I'm gonna say 2 is also my favorite, but
It was also your favorite. Okay.
there's not a whole lot of daylight between them.
Okay.
All right. I like it. Let's go to, speaking of the legend, let's go to the legend.
All right. The legend, owner of a 16 streak,
Right.
went over a couple of years. Yeah.
Me, right?
He's the-
He's the
he's-
legend.
Not
Oh,
quite yet. Not quite yet. You got to get that 16 streak to be the legend.
A legend for letting you offspring knows that Glen Cairn for sure. Yeah.
Hey, he loves to smell it. I'll let him
Really?
smell it.
Oh,
I'm
Hey.
gonna have
cool.
a problem whenever he gets older.
That's a good kid. Yeah. If he likes nosing that stuff. Yeah. All right, Mr. Brenner, we're going to you. Is he on mute?
I'm muted.
He's-
Okay.
He's
Okay,
good
there you
now.
go. He's good.
Two's a Dusty and 2 is my favorite,
Okay.
It's a 2 for
but
2.
they're both delicious.
Both delicious. All right.
All right. Let's go to Robert Mace.
All right. He was
Sorry,
trying to
I
get his
forgot
dog to
which one.
nose it. I saw him trying to get his
No,
dog.
I
to nose
forgot.
it. The dog was not a
No,
fan,
I
by the
forgot.
way. The dog did not like the whiskey. So yeah,
No, he was not a fan. My brother said to put some peanut butter on it. Maybe that would work.
maybe. Yeah.
So 2 is my favorite,
Okay.
and I'm gonna go, I guess, against the grain, and I'm gonna say 1 was the Dusty.
1 was Dusty. Okay.
All right. Let's go Jason Souter.
I think 2's the Dusty.
Okay.
And favorite, it is. It's tough because it just depends on your mood. But right now, I'm going to say 2's my favorite for that kind of after. It really does kind of have an after dinner drink quality, just feel to it.
Okay. All right. Let's go to Joy. Let's go to Miss Joy.
2 is my favorite, kind of by a long shot. I mean, they are both, you can tell, the same product, but 1 was just a favorite. And I'm going to side with number 1 being the Dusty. I'll go against the legend, which seems foolish, but
Not
So,
really.
Did you say 2 was your favorite and you thought 1 was the Dusty?
correct.
Okay. All right. Let's go to Nate Mace.
Double deuces.
Double
Okay.
deuces. I like it. Short and sweet. Double peace signs. All right, Mr. Bill, you're hanging out in your red shirt. What do you got going on here?
I have not historically been a fan of Dickel, but I enjoyed this tonight. It was good. I'm going to go against the grain with everybody. I'm going to go 1 and 1.
1
Right.
and 1. Okay.
So, Steve, where are we at right now, vote wise?
All right. On the favorite, 2 leads 6-1. 2 leads
Okay.
6-1 on that. It's a little bit closer on the guess the Dusty. It started out looked like 2 was going to run away with this. It is not running away with it. It's 4-3 right now. 4-3.
All right, 4-3. I
close.
like it. That's where I like them to be. All right, let's go with Mr. Whitlatch, Bob.
I'm right where I want to be, after the legend. 2.
2 and 2. Okay.
2 and 2. All right, let's finish off our Maces for the night. Let's go with Mr. Kent Mace.
So, I believe 2 is the Dusty.
Okay.
I don't really want to make a choice between the 2 because I like them equally. But if you force me to, I'm going to take number 1 because I think it's the one I can get.
Okay.
It's the available one.
All right.
Okay.
So I'll will
It's
myself.
good.
that-
It's good logic. Good logic there. All right. Let's Tim Swyatt.
I'm gonna go with 2 is the Dusty. 1 was my favorite.
2
All
is
right.
the Dusty. 1 favorite.
And James, let's go with James.
So Kent, I like the way you said it, because I think 2 is the Dusty, but I don't want it to be the Dusty because it was my favorite. Yeah, so another double deuce, 2 and 2.
Double deuce, 2 and 2.
But
Okay.
I will say the one is amazing, and whichever one isn't the Dusty, I'm going to have to go get a bottle.
All right. All right, Steve Akley, looks like you're next, sir.
Yeah. Our most popular vote of the evening has been 2 and 2. And that's what I'm going to be going to. I'm going to be going 2 and 2.
2 and 2 it is.
Roadhouse
All
and
right.
this thing to death, man.
All right, that only leaves our special guest, Ben. I think let's go ahead and get his official vote here. What's your favorite? Which one do you think or know is the Dusty?
Yeah, I'm also double deuce, man. I love drinking in a time machine. Any chance that I get, I have been fortunate enough to taste multiple old whiskeys, and I enjoy them more and more and more every time, because you taste things in those whiskeys that, in my opinion, do not exist in whiskey today.
All right, another vote for 2-2. What's the final tally?
All right, the final tally, Wes, ends up being interesting. You stopped it at a great time because it was so close. It ends up not being close. It ends up being a runaway on both of these.
Okay.
And the same score on both. So it's 10-3. They think that number 2 is the Dusty. So 10 think that number 2, 3 think number 1 is the Dusty. So there will be a streak tonight. We don't know who it's going to be. Either Mike's going to continue or we're going to have someone new, but there will be a streak because we do have people voting for both. And then the favorite, again, this is the one that you can't get wrong because we're just asking you, what's your opinion? What do you think is better? Also was a 10-3. So in favor of 2. So number 2 was the favorite, 10-3 over number 1.
All right, so the results are a good news, bad news. The good news is most everyone was right. The bad news is you can't get the one you like the most. So number 2 was the Dusty.
All right. And Mike, you move up to 5. 5
right, Mike.
now is the official number. Woo.
We're going.
Yeah.
Keep it going.
Keep going.
You get a smoker's jacket for getting 5, like Saturday Night Live. Or
Yes.
We got a members only jacket,
right?
Yeah.
We got a members only jacket waiting for
nice.
Members only.
Yeah. Well,
One of
that
one
was
of those
definitely
elusive bourbon colors. There you go.
Let's bring back the letter jacket. It's
Yes, let's do that.
Yes, yeah.
With a big
Yeah,
V
and then
for
maybe
bourbon.
every 5 you get a stripe.
Yeah, that's right, man.
Like you used to get in high school.
You could do it like the college football helmets. Just put a sticker every time you get one. So there we go.
Well, yeah, we could start a debate right there, Wes.
Oh, there you go. Talking to the guy
Oh,
from
flight
Texas
jacket,
about
those
college
would be
football.
cooler.
Yeah. Oh,
And
flight
Wes,
jacket.
which one is the non-Dusty?
Number 1. Number
No,
one
but
is
which Dickel is it?
both of these were number 12.
George
Yeah, the
Dickel,
90,
number
the
12.
90 proof number 12. Both were it was as close as you could get in one of these to it's the exact, obviously it's a bit different, but product wise, it's the same proof, same brand. One's from 85, one's from 2021.
They did in 85. They also did a European only release that's 86 proof and it's 10 years old.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
It's funny. My pregame tonight was the 2005 bib.
Oh, there you go.
Oh,
And it literally tastes like the combination of the two tonight, though. Like
So
it's got
good.
kind of like the cooked fruit notes of the Dusty, but it's got that spike and the kind of punch that the first one had.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, let's hear it for our guest from George Dickel here. Benjamin, thank you for being part of this, man. Really appreciate it. That was fun. You added a lot to this. So we really appreciate it. It was you were a fun guest to have on with us, and the educational stuff you brought was really cool. So you really helped out a lot. We appreciate that. And as always, thanks to our master of ceremonies, Mr. Wes Hardin. Wes always does a killer job. Excellent job, Mr. Wes.
Thanks,
You brought us some great education and history, and you brought us some great whiskey. So we appreciate that, man. Keep the hunt out there. Keep looking, see what you can find. And we look forward to whatever you've got coming up. We do have a couple events. There are tickets available for both of these. So we've got a Dusty J.W. Dant coming up on April 18th. We do have a member of the Dant family that will be joining us for that. He'll be playing along just like Benjamin did tonight, providing some history as well as seeing if he can guess which one is the Dusty. That'll be fun. If not, he'll shame the family. So he's got a lot riding on this, even more so than Benjamin here. So That's some fun stuff. And then Kentucky Tavern, which is a really cool one. And that's the old Captain Reserve bottle. So that's really one of the coolest bottles that you'll ever see. Designed to be on a ship, riding the waves. It does not tip over. Very cool stuff. So we'll be comparing that, which is a bottom shelfer these days versus that old version. And when is that version from too, Wes? That's an old one, right?
I have to get the exact year. It's 65, 8, 7, something like that.
60, yeah. So 60s, so versus today. So should be fun.
60s versus today. Yeah.
Theoretically, it seems like that'll be an easy one to guess, but the blind taste test is the unknown to all these things. So it's always fun to compare on a blind basis and see what happens. So with that, we'll say goodbye to our folks who are watching this, who didn't get to attend tonight or watching it on our YouTube channel. Goodbye, folks. And I'll stick around. Wes will stick around. Benjamin, maybe. And we'll talk whiskey, whatever you'd like after the show here. Thanks, gang.
Thanks, everyone.